We'll call this hearing of Finance and Tax to order. Would the clerk read the roll, please?
Chairman Hedlund.
Here.
Vice Chair Haggard.
Here.
Representative Anderson.
Here.
Representative Doctor.
Here.
Representative Dressler.
Here.
Representative Greenike.
Here.
Representative Machenbacher.
Here.
Representative Neering.
Here.
Representative Olson.
Here.
Representative Porter.
Here.
Representative Steiner.
Here.
Representative Toman.
Here.
Representative Foss.
Here.
Representative Ista.
Here. Thank you. We have a quorum, so we will open up the hearing on House Bill 1176. Would the clerk read the title, please?
Relating to legacy fund definitions, the legacy earnings fund, and estimated property tax and budget hearing notices, to provide an appropriation, to provide a transfer, to provide an effective date, to provide an expiration date, and to declare an emergency.
Thank you. Representative Nathy, welcome to Finance and Tax. Can you bring your mic a little bit closer? We've had
Helps
some.
if you turn it on.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Representative Mike Nathy, District 30. You have in front of you today House Bill 1176, which pertains to the property tax questions. This is probably the most extensive and changing property tax proposal we've seen in my 16 years here. Not only does it provide property tax relief, but also reform, something of which we have not really done in the past to this extent. It's a pretty extensive bill. I think it's going to have major impacts. We've all heard from our constituents as far as providing property tax relief. Those of you, such as I, knocking on doors, hearing it from the constituents, they are demanding we do something, and we do something now, and we do it effective. We do that it's sustainable. So, Mr. Chairman, as we walk through this, and committee, I gave you the summary of the bill, and we're going to kind of be going all over the bill. So, but I'm going to be going off the summary, and we can talk as we go along. So, the first part we're going to take, committee, is the front page, the property classifications. This is the sections 4, 11, 12, and 13 that has to do with creating the primary residence category. Right now we have 4 categories. This will be the 5th. This will also help to administer this plan. It helps us in several different ways as far as certification, eligibility of primary residents that are based on applications and approval processes that are administered through the tax department. Mr. Chairman, before I go any further, there's a number of people behind me this morning. We're going to hear from Senator Rummel, who's had a big part in this, and I want to thank Senator Rummel for his help in all this. We've been working on this since last summer. Also, we're going to have Leader LaFour has also been a big advocate and played a hand in developing this, along with Senator Beckedahl in the Senate. And then Governor Armstrong has his proposal in here for the tax, for the property tax process. So I just, again, want to thank everybody, because this isn't just any one person's bill. This is the legislature's bill, because we've had 5, 6, 7 different legislators have input in this bill. And that is something we don't always see up here. And that just speaks to the importance of what we're seeing today. So, all right, back to the bill. So the first one is the property classifications in section 4, 11, 12, and 13. Committee, I'd like to go over to second page, the property tax relief funding. It has to do in sections 1, 2, 3, and 21 of the bill. This is the program that the Governor Armstrong had suggested. But as you read it, you'll see what it does in there. It clarifies the distribution from the legacy fund to the legacy earnings fund. It provides intent language. There's intent language in here, committee. We've all heard about this portion of the bill being pushed out 10 years, 5 bienniums. This bill is really just a 2-year bill for now. So if we pass this bill and the 1550s in effect, it is just for this biennium. When we come back next biennium, next session, we would take up this program and decide, do we want to go the next step, go from 1500, 1550 to 2000, or whatever the legacy stream dictates. So I just want to make that clear. This is just a 2-year bill, and the future legislatures will determine how much or if this program keeps going. But in the bill, you will see the intent language has to do with increasing the primary resident credit in future bienniums. Also, the intent to use the legacy earnings to pay for the program. So, and that is, that's in those sections. The third one I want to talk about is the Homestead Credit Program. This program for any seniors over 65 that own property. Mr. Chairman, this is extremely important. As we know, there's a lot of seniors out there who own homes who do not have the income to pay for some of these properties. That is a classification of people I deal with every day in my job. I can tell you from knocking on doors last spring, talked to a lot of seniors. They weren't looking for the elimination of property tax. They just wanted the property taxes to level off. They're willing to pay for, like we all are, for the services and everything that we all enjoy, but they wanted some relief and more relief. And although we do already give property tax relief to the property tax owners of $1.3 billion, they are looking for more relief. And this really helps the seniors over 65. Tax Commissioner Crocius will have scenarios for you, committee, not only on the impact of this program, but also the impact on the 1550, as I call it, the 1550 program. He'll be showing you home values and what that means to the property tax owner. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. It's pretty, there's some great results from that program and from this homestead tax credit. So what we've done in sections 5 and 6 is we've increased the threshold, the 2-income threshold, from 40,000 to 50,000, and then the other threshold from 70 to 80. So we've increased that by $10,000. Also, the minimum taxable value exemptions we bumped up from 9,000 to 11,250. And then you'll also see in there, there's something for renters in there. We bumped up the renter refund from $400 to $600. When we've been asked about renters, it's always a little dicey issue since they do not own property. But in this bill, we are taking care of renters as we go forward. Number 4 is the primary residence tax credit that we've been talking about, the governor's proposal. Again, this would continue. It's in section 7, 8, 9, and 10. It would continue the program beyond tax year 25 by removing the program expiration dates. That's the PRC that we passed last session. It increases the credit from 500 to 1550 beginning in tax year 25. It includes primary residence held in trust beginning in 2025. The legislature inadvertently omitted trusts last session. This is going to take care of it. This is everything forward. Now, I understand there may be a bill when it comes to trust to go retroactive, but that's a separate discussion, separate bill. But this will take care of what we omitted last session. Also, we have, it provides a transition year during the tax year 25 to align credit for mobile homes with the real estate tax cycle. And again, I'll let the tax commissioner decide on, explain that. But again, they would get a property tax credit just on their home, not on the property, because the property is probably owned by a company, but they would get a property tax credit on the value of that trailer home. The section would also clarify the process for prorating property taxes if the primary residence is subject to a real estate transaction. And it also integrate the credit with the new primary residential classification after the new classification becomes effective. So again, the 500 would be put into the 1550. Also, it's important to note, committee, on page 10 of the section they would still have to apply like they do today. So they would have to opt in. And Mr. Chairman, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think the property owner should take responsibility for this, take responsibility for their property taxes. And it also, more importantly, notifies that owner what they're getting from the state. You've heard my frustrations on the $1.3 billion property tax that we do now. And I've told many stories here lately that I've heard from friends of mine who are very well-to-do and smart. They do not know that we're given that $1.3 billion property tax. They can't find it on the statement. And so what this does is when they go in and opt in, they will see what the state of North Dakota is doing to their property taxes. I've had more people come up to me and say, hey, thanks for the $500. Not enough, but thanks. And those same people didn't know that they were getting $2,000, $3,000 of property tax relief on their statement. I had to walk a couple of my friends through this. So again, I'm a believer in the opt-in. Well, at least we have to do it for now. And the tax commissioner can maybe talk a little bit more depth if we get to the point where they don't have to. But as far as I understand it, they need to build a base, a database. I think there's a lot of challenges there because how do you know if Representative Porter is living in Mandan one day and another day he's living in North Mandan? You just, they don't have a mechanism to track those sorts of things. So that is the reason why this bill will keep the opt-in option. Committee will go to the back page, number 5, the property tax notices and statements. What this basically does is do away with the August property tax statement that comes out. You know, they get notification in March, August, and December. We're going to remove that. A lot of times those figures are just estimations. And quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, all this does is just fire up the property tax owners because these numbers are high. And then when they come out with their final numbers in October, the subs say, nope, we knocked it down to here. Still high, but knocked it down to here. So there's really no need to have that August one. That came from Senator Cook a number of years ago as far as that is concerned. So the bill would eliminate the August statement. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, Section 20, I should first get back. The property tax notices are in Section 14, 15, 16, 17, and 19. And the final one, Section 20, are the repealers. And you can see there what that all entails right now. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to get to the property tax reform piece, the program proposed by the governor. We have some up-to-date numbers on the property tax relief for the primary residents. It was stated it was 483, but the tax has done some updating, and that number now is 535 million for that portion. Of the 535, 362 would be coming from the residential property tax credit, the PRC. And then of the additional legacy property tax credit would be 173 million from the legacy earnings fund, again, for a total of $535 million. And again, committee, I know I said it earlier, but this is a 2-year program that every legislature will take up as we go forward. The governor had given some estimates as far as 1,550 this year and maybe 2,000 and maybe whatever it is in the upcoming years will be dictated by how much comes off that legacy fund. And the more money that comes off that legacy fund, the less our general fund obligation gets through time as we go with this. So again, the governor will speak and his people may speak to that directly. So. Mr. Chairman, I know I zipped through it fairly quickly, but that concludes my testimony and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions, committee members?
All right. Do pass.
I don't see any. Thank you, Representative Nathan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further testimony in support of House Bill 1176. Who's next?
Rummel.
Senator Rummel, welcome to Finance and Tax.
Good morning, Chairman Hedlund and Finance and Tax Committee members. It's an honor to be with you here this morning. I'm going to be very brief. I stand in support of House Bill 1176. The sponsor did an excellent job of going through it. I certainly want to thank him and all of the individuals that had their input into House Bill 1176. Tax is complex. We know that. Nothing is going to be perfect. Last session, of course, with 1158, as has already been mentioned, we have a problem with the trust. We have to fix that. We will have issues. There's something that we will miss and probably break in 1176. But what's nice is we come back in 2 years and we get to fix it again. What I like about House Bill 1176 is that there was a whole lot of ideas. We know that there's many, many ideas, but this bill has substantial property tax relief. The best part, though, is it's sustainable. I like the sustainability of this. It has a path for further property tax relief. And through time, that relief will, of course, take care of the general fund. We'll get the general fund out of property tax relief. And that'll position future legislative sessions the way they need to be positioned. And also, it could provide additional property tax relief, as we already talked about. So I am going to keep it short. I ask for your support of House Bill 1176, and I would certainly stand for any questions that you have. And I, again, want to thank everybody that had input into this particular bill.
Thank you, Senator Rummel. Questions? Well, thank you for your testimony, Representative Nathy. You had forgotten.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As I was going through the bill, I omitted, we did not talk about the levy limits, the 3% that has caused a lot of discussion and such. So committee, back to the summary. The 3% levy limits are in section 18 of the bill. You'll see it there. What this does is a 3% on the property tax levy, limiting the property tax levy increases to 3% a year. They can, if they don't use the 3%, for example, say they use 2, they could then carry forward one of those percentage points to the next year. So then they would get 4, but it's only it'd be for 1 year. And they have the ability to go above the 3% if the political sub says, hey, 3% is not enough. We have a lot of stuff coming up. We need additional revenue. They then have the opportunity to take that to the vote of the people. And they can do it during a general election, or they can have a special election for that. So they do have an option. They do have the ability to increase their levy by taking to the vote of the people. So sorry about the omission, Mr. Chairman, but that should do it. So I'll take any questions on that if anybody has any.
Representative Vista.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Nath, is there an enforcement mechanism for that? If a political subdivision goes over that 3%, can a taxpayer, throw a challenge flag and say, wait a minute, I was promised a 3% levy cap. What do I do now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, are you talking about if they go above the 3?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Well, again, they can go above the 3 by the vote of the public, right? So if the public says, hey, we want to go to 4%, they have every right to do so. I may not agree with that, but they would have every opportunity to do so.
And if I may continue, my question is, what if they do without going to vote? What if accounting error, or maybe there's some nefarious jurisdiction out there that doesn't care what limits are put on it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Vista, I guess we didn't think about that. I would assume if there is a blatant violation of this, there'll be other steps we could take, AG or whatever, things along those lines. But I suspect the political subs will, if this were to pass, they'll adhere to the bill. If not, there would be consequences legally and probably down the road legislatively. You never know. So,
Committee members, I suspect we'll hear from the political subs about this particular issue and their ideas on how we might be able to make it work. But any other questions for Representative Nathy? Well, thank you again, Representative Nathy. Leader LaFleur, welcome to Finance and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, Chairman Hedlund and members of the House Finance and Tax Committee. For the record, my name is Mike LaFleur, and I serve Dickinson District 37 in the House of Representatives. I'm here today to support House Bill 1176. I believe that this bill provides a bold, sustainable path to property tax reform while allocating legacy earnings dollars to both present and future generations of North Dakotans. Representative Nathy talked about the 3% cap. I won't continue with that, but it does have flexibility for the political subdivisions that if they go under that, they can bank that for a period of up to 5 years. And additionally, if the political subdivision does not feel that 3% is enough to do the job that they think needs to be done, they can go to a vote of the people. That's the bill provides for that. The bill does provide, as we know, we tried for the first time a property tax credit of $500. I think the state tax department just did a phenomenal job of advertising that, making sure that the citizens of this state certainly understood what they needed to do to obtain that tax credit. And to their credit, again, the way that they can apply for that takes literally 2 minutes. And so thank you to the state tax department for that. So this bill moves that number from $500 to $1,550. And so again, I believe, unless I'm contradicted by the tax department, my latest figures show that about 92% of the potential households that could apply for that credit did. And so what this bill does, and again, there's going to be some updated figures from what I'm giving you here. But one of the first things that I did is I had a visit with the chairman of appropriations. What is it that we can afford, and where are the dollars allocated from? So the idea was the $310 million from the general fund, $173 million from the legacy earnings fund. And with the rapid principal growth of the legacy fund and the investments, the investments have just been outstanding. The balanced legacy fund has accelerated tremendously. So what I'd like to have you do is look at my first attachment. I don't think the public is fully aware of what the Legislative Assembly has done over the years in terms of property tax relief. If you look at the chart, you can see starting in the biennium 2007 and 9, the legislature provided $133 million toward property tax relief. And moving all the way through this current biennium, $1.8 billion. I think it's important for the public to know that the legislature has done a really good job in allocating dollars for property tax relief. Now, with this particular bill, the earlier projections were about 553 million. Now, give and take, that might be just a little bit more than that, but if it is, we'll certainly visit with appropriations on how to deal with that. But it is important, I think, that the citizens understand both on their tax statement for the legislative tax relief, and also through the history of what the legislature has done over the last 17 years. It's increased every biennium, and so I'm very proud of the fact of what the Legislative Assembly has done over that time frame. And then in the spreadsheet prepared by OMB, with the assumption of, and that's a spreadsheet that's in your packet that I handed out, that's assuming $60 oil. That's assuming 1.1 million barrels of production per day, and a return on investment of 6.5%, which is what the model for the SIB is. And so we took all of that. And it's difficult to project out that many years because there's so many things that can happen that we have no control over. But if you look at that chart, you'll see that in this biennium, there's 601 million that's available in the Legacy Earnings Fund. You see how that is also allocated to other items, leaving the 173 million, which is part of the funding formula for this. And then you can see that if those assumptions are correct, that would grow to $320 million. I'm referring to the sixth line item on this particular spreadsheet. You see how it grows from 173 million all the way to 1.3 billion in 12 years. And at the bottom, the last section of that particular page, you see that we're allocating 310 million toward from the general fund, and that over time, if future legislative assemblies choose to follow this model, then they have the ability to take all the general fund expenditure for this out, provided that the numbers stay true. And then if you go back to the information in bold, it shows based on the increase in the legacy earnings that in 2027, $2,000 worth of relief, in 2029, $2,900, and so forth. Now, I understand these are assumptions. These are not in gold, but this shows a potential of the potential future credits. If you go to the very back page, you'll see that, again, with those same assumptions, the legacy fund would grow to, in 2037, to $30.5 billion. And I did see toward the end of those projections, and I'd be happy to share those with you, because it was a month to month, and it showed how that if at the 30 billion, that the monthly return would be about $166 million a month, which was unbelievable. But if you think about the Common Schools Trust Fund, which was started at statehood, can you imagine what they'd be thinking now if they knew that there'd be $7 billion in that? That's the foresight that North Dakotans have had on that. In the Common Schools Trust Fund, we know is over $7 billion. Like I said, it's going to provide approximately $500 million toward the cost of K through 12 this biennium. So I believe it's important for these tax credits to come from a stable source. And by having the patience that North Dakotans have had over the years, this can come to become reality. And in 2010, the voters approved the Legacy Fund, which has shown tremendous growth. And so this is, I believe, a sustainable model to provide property tax relief in perpetuity. It has the cap for the reform piece. excuse me, it also allocates dollars for homestead tax credit and also has a provision for renters. So there's been a lot of work done on this over many, many months. I don't want to repeat the things that Representative Nathie or Senator Rummel had stated, but like I said, I wanted to come up here and show my support for, I think, what is a well thought out, well vetted piece of legislation. And with that, I would ask the committee to consider do pass recommendation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative LaFleur. Questions, committee? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. Governor Armstrong, welcome to Finance and Tax.
Thanks, committee. I'm Kelly Armstrong, retired American Legion baseball coach. I came in here this morning and I thought of another life when I was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we had a committee meeting that morning, and Dwight Cook and I often were two of the first people in the legislative chamber, and so we talked, and he had in front of the Senate Finance and Tax Committee, he had like a $300 million income tax bill. So this is when we started this way back in 2015. And so we walked down into the center column as we're both going to our committees, and the press is setting up cameras and everybody's packed and it's all wild. And he's like, and he looks at me and he's like, finally, somebody cares about income tax. And I had to look at him and I said, Minority Leader Max Schneider's revenge porn bill is in judiciary. And so I don't know how Senator Cook would have thought of this bill, but he would have been very excited that there are this many people interested in tax policy in the state of North Dakota. I'm here in full-throated support of this bill. You all heard what I said, or I hope at least most of you were listening during the State of the State address. We've been really blessed. We have got to talk and listen to North Dakotans from one end of the state to the other over the last year. I love campaigning. I love listening to people in American Legion halls and gymnasiums and barbecues and big communities, small communities, ag communities, oil communities. And I can absolutely tell you that the people who care enough to show up and talk about who they are going to support for any election in North Dakota, property tax is their number one priority. It should be ours. As we continue to go through this, the single most important thing we heard from people was taxes on their house. And so there's been various different ideas. None of these are new. I mean, we've been talking about these since before. And we took as many meetings as we could with as many different people from all ideological spectrums across both the state Senate and the state house, county commissioners, city commissioners, township, everywhere and in between. And I think I would really like to say a thank you to Mike Nathie for introducing this bill, because he's right. This isn't any one person's bill. There are a lot of people that have been working on these issues, not just this interim, but as we continue to move forward. I think the biggest thing here is we recognize two things. One, what we've done before hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. I was here when we bought down the 20 mills for social services. The fight on the floor of the Senate wasn't about whether we were lowering property taxes, it was about whether we were taking away local control. That was the fight on the floor. I'm assuming that was the fight on the floor in the House. Well, there was a little bit of a speed bump maybe, but we didn't lower people's property taxes. State pays for 20 mills for social services, and people are as frustrated as they've ever been. So I think the reform is really important. And I think the 3% cap on existing property tax budgets with as much flexibility as we could build in is a really, really great place to start. And I know there's going to be people that have concerns with it, but I think the alternative is either do the same thing we do over and over and expect a different result, or do nothing. And I don't think the North Dakota citizens will stand for either one of those. So I think that's a really huge part, but I want to talk about the sustainability of the plan. And I agree with Senator Rummel. We will have to come back and fix some things. But once we get this right, I will just forewarn everybody, I think that bottom stream of the legacy fund, and I know why we don't do it now, and I think that's smart legislation, and I think it's smart policy, but I think eventually we should make it permanent. Because if we get through if we have good bienniums, we don't need it now. Half of it's going into the general fund, half of it's going into SIF. We have major surpluses in both of those as we start the session. But then we can deliver that. And then down the road, if something does if our economy goes bad and we're not getting $60 for a barrel of oil, or if we're only getting $6 for a bushel of soybeans, then we can play with the general fund general fund piece of it. And the worst case scenario would be you're delivering more relief slower. Once this thing takes off, I think that's the huge part of it, because we're basing the legacy fund stream on 6.5% growth, but there's a part of this we cannot factor in, and that's that nobody gets more than zero. So if you get $1,550 in relief and you only pay $1,000 in property taxes, that extra $500 goes back into the legacy fund stream for the next biennium. So as more and more properties come off the rolls, that money will help increase that fund at an exponential rate. And I think it's a great place to project out as conservatively as possible, because the one thing we all will enjoy and benefit as a policy perspective is under promising and over performing. And as long as we continue, and I have no doubt that North Dakota's ag and energy economy are going to continue to grow and are going to continue to expand, we will be able to deliver sustainable relief. The one thing that I think, I'm uniquely proud of in this piece of legislation is how we deal with the ongoing general fund expense. And when property tax relief grows to $2,000, and this comes from a place, I spent 6 years in DC. 75% of the federal budget is spent before I ever got to take a vote. Ever. It's spent before any member that you elect to Congress, wherever you live in the country, ever takes a vote. So as this piece of the fund grows, you will take 50 cents of the growth and pay off the general fund expense, and the other 50 cents of the growth will go to continued property tax relief. So both of those things will continue to grow. And I want to be clear, this is a primary residential credit. This is what we heard from our constituents all across the state as we were going. But also, it's a path to get the legacy or the general fund expense for this program to zero. But it is also a path to get every single primary residence in North Dakota to zero. There's been some confusion about that, and I want to make it perfectly clear. As we grow that legacy fund stream, we will deliver the relief to the people who need it the most first. Seniors, low-income North Dakotans, the people who are really, truly getting priced out of keeping their home. But we will deliver primary residential tax relief as long as our economy keeps growing and as long as the legacy fund continues to grow. We will be able to deliver primary residential relief that eventually gets every primary residence to zero. I think it's the most aggressive plan we can have. I think we get through one biennium and it becomes durable. And what I mean by that is we can figure out how to deliver this relief and pay off the general fund expense. So we all have term limits in this room. It won't be ours, but I don't think we should be saddling future legislatures with an ever expanding general fund expense that is politically untenable to vote against. So we can grow this relief. We can grow it really, really fast, provided our economy continues to grow and the legacy fund continues to grow. And we can do it in a way that's durable, aggressive, and sustainable, and delivering it to the people who are demanding it the most, the quickest. So I really appreciate everybody's attitude and ability and willing to work and cooperate with it. And again, I couldn't more strongly recommend it do pass. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Governor Armstrong?
My team wrote me a whole thing. I didn't look at it. They'll get used to that. My DC team knew that pretty quick.
Well, I don't see any, so thank you for your testimony,
Thanks.
Governor. Further testimony and support? Joe, were you coming next?
I can, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hedlund, committee members. I'm Joe Morissette from the Office of Management and Budget. It's a pleasure to be here today and testify in support of House Bill 1176. I'm not going to repeat anything. I'm just going to speak a little bit to the numbers. And I recognize that The tax commissioner is likely going to speak today, and there would be some change in those numbers, some revision. And I just want to speak a little bit to the numbers that have been used so far, like the numbers that Representative before spoke to. And so the $483 million price of the two components of the credit, the general fund and the legacy streams fund, the calculation behind that came from an assumption that there would be 155,000 qualifying residences. And I believe the number that that the tax department has indicated qualified when they testified in September to the interim tax relief committee was a little bit less than 135. 155,000 was the number that was used in these assumptions. So that allowed some growth beyond that known number at the time, but assuming that there was some increase in the number of residences, but maybe not capturing all of the increase that relates to changes in the program eligibility, like trusts and those things that Representative Nathy talked about. But that's the calculation behind that. The 310 million from the general fund, which will be, no surprise, included in Governor Armstrong's budget recommendation that'll be released tomorrow, was based on that number, 155,000 qualifying residences at $1,000 per year as the general fund cost. The legacy stream amount, because of the policy change you enacted last session to go to a percent of market value allocation into that legacy streams fund, that's a known number. We know how much is going to be available. And this approach would take the bottom two streams that are currently set in law. So kind of in the middle of page 1 there, it lays out what the streams would look like. The first 102.6 million goes to debt service payments on existing bonds. The next 225 million, as you've defined in statute, goes into the general fund to offset the cost of previously authorized tax relief measures. The next 100 million goes into the legacy highway distribution fund to fund infrastructure projects at DOT and cities and counties. And then the remaining amount is currently split evenly between the general fund and SIF. And this proposal would take that bottom stream and create a new legacy property tax relief fund that would capture that amount that for the next biennium is going to be 173 million and direct it into this property tax credit proposal. And again, the resulting credit there is another $550 on top of the $1,000 coming from the general fund. And that again is based on the assumption of 155,000 qualifying residences. The table on page 2 of my testimony is based on those assumptions that Representative LaFleur shared with you. So unknowns, certainly, but based on an assumed rate of return of 6.5% and an assumption that our oil tax revenues that are allocated into the legacy fund basically stay flat over a long period of time. So that's one assumption. The other assumption is that as a legislative body in future sessions, you decide that, as the bill states now, it would be when you get over $2,000 in total credit from all funding sources, you would start to reduce the general fund cost. It doesn't specify how you would do that. The assumption here is that you would, as the governor mentioned, you would evenly split future earnings between reducing the general fund cost and adding to the property tax credit. That is not spelled out in the bill, and that would be your policy decision in future legislative sessions. So I just wanted to clarify the numbers here. Assume that that would be your policy decision once you reach that threshold, is that you would split the earnings to do both, reduce general fund cost and grow the credit at the same time. The last part of my testimony, Mr. Chairman, speaks to the homestead tax credit program and the changes in income eligibility and exemption amount. And I'll just say that the Armstrong executive budget included the continuation of the current appropriation that you provided in the 23-25 biennium of 72.4 million. And my understanding was that changes in this bill would result in spending out that full amount, because in the current biennium, we're going to have some turn back in that program. I think about $20 million that under the current parameters will not be spent out of that appropriation. So whether or not that is the case or whether or not those numbers have been revised, I will defer to the tax commissioner. But the assumption that we had used in the development of the Armstrong budget was that we would have a policy change here that would result in spending out that full 72.4 million appropriation. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all that I had to say. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Morissette. So the governor mentioned that that there would be possibly more homes included in the future. And you mentioned the 155,000, which is higher than the 135,000. Is that including ag? And did your group discuss the farmsteads that are valued over 250,000 that currently pay tax?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, the number there was kind of a placeholder of 155,000, recognizing it was more than what we knew in September. But there were no assumptions made about policy changes or new residences that would be eligible for the primary residence credit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Morissette, so agricultural homes paying tax over 250,000 are not in this policy piece. They're not in the bill.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Steiner, I would say they're in to the extent that they're eligible for the primary residence credit under current law.
Thank you.
Did I see any other questions? Yes, not. Thank you, Joe, for your
Thank you,
testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Further testimony and support. Commissioner? Are you?
Good morning, Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brian Crocious, Tax Commissioner. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the household count first in terms of our numbers being a little bit different. Referring to the 155,000 homes that we presented this past summer in terms of qualifying homes, they did not include homes in trust, which now under House Bill 1176 will qualify. And we had approximately 2,500 applications related to homes in trust. And one reality is people just stopped applying because word was out that they weren't going to qualify. So we took it up to about that level. We're estimating approximately 3,500 to 4,000 homes will land in trust. North Dakota is also a growing state. On average, over the last 10 years, when you look at the 10-year average from 2014 to 2023, which is the latest census data, we averaged 2,606 new homes per year in terms of new housing starts. When you look at the biennium, of course, that doubles. And when you start to add up the trust, homes in trust, and also just organic growth in the state, you quickly get to about approximately 165,000 homes, which is the figure we're using in terms of the calculations that were presented for fiscal impact. So that hopefully answers a little bit in terms of the shift upward. It's a good thing. It's a very good scenario when you think of the fact that North Dakota is growing. Of those new housing starts as well, in terms of impacting the fiscal note, the average new housing start is approximately $292,000 in cost. That is what new home construction runs these days. So they're going to get the full $1,550 credit. Some potentially may even qualify for all or a portion of the homestead tax credit as well, albeit probably a smaller percentage, but we don't know exactly who the shift in their income and for the 65 and older crowd, but that has to be factored in as well. Inflation, and while the 1,550 is static for in general terms, homes that are valued at more than 150,000, those individuals max out on the credit. They're not going to receive more than $1,550. However, 1 in 4 homes falls below that $150,000 threshold. So the calculation that I'm putting forth also includes a 3% rate of inflation, an inflationary index adjustment, because that has to be taken into account. So someone who had 1,200 in credit will receive approximately another $36 the following year because of that inflationary adjustment as their home values rise. So you're going to have some growth in that in terms of the fiscal calculation that was put forth. The numbers that, and then after I just quickly go through the numbers that we've calculated, I'll talk about what does it mean to an average homeowner in a $250,000 house, or based on different criteria, how far along does that get them in terms of property taxes covered? But first, in terms of the note overall, the calculation, $505 million is tied to the primary residence credit. An additional 19 million, approximately 19, or let me reframe that. Yeah, approximately 19 million would be tied to, or 29 million, I'm sorry. It's actually 28.85 million. I've been working these numbers quite a bit, so I've got them memorized. But 29 million would be tied in for all intensive purposes to the homestead credit expansion. A smaller amount, 1 million for renters refund. We currently disperse approximately $1.5 million per biennium for renter refund. Because that is going up, that will equate to approximately another $1 million. And we did ask for a repeat of the appropriation received last session as well of 1.5 million to administer some software development costs, and then of course marketing, which did prove to be very effective. And
Commissioner, could you just repeat that renters number again?
approximately 1 million in additional.
In addition, but what would
In
the
addition to
total
the
number be?
1.5 million that is currently received by renters in the state. So an additional $1 million, moving the credit from up to $400 to up to $600. So in total, renters are receiving approximately 2.5 million in relief per biennium. So beyond that, what does it mean to, and are there any questions related to the numbers before I go to some of the different scenarios, Mr. Chairman?
Questions? Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cautious, I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure it's correct. So the credits given, are they offset by anything? Let's say the disabled veterans credit, does that offset any of this, or is that would that be in addition to whatever is put onto that, or any other kind of credit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, appreciate the question, and the answer is that is all factored in. It is prorated both based on income levels for senior citizens. That was very precise in terms of where we looked at each, where they would fall in terms of housing value for 65 and older. So are they in a $100,000 home? Or are they in a $175,000 home? Where do they max out? Are they in a $300,000 home? And when you think of low-income seniors being in homes in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, and that it may not match up to their income level, that's not unusual. And the reason being, as an example, when I built a home in Bismarck about 25 years ago, I did so, including the lot, for $125,000. Today it's valued at almost $500,000. And I haven't done a lot to it, to be honest. So it does happen. People are aging, our seniors in particular, and that's included in the calculation. They are slowly aging in place in the state. More and more are choosing to stay in their home. And you have to remember, with 1.7 or 1.8 seniors per household, some are widowed. They live individually as individuals for whatever reason. That has to be built into the calculation as well, because we're seeing a slow shift of, and it's not, not overly pronounced, but when you're looking into the next biennium and how these calculations have to be measured and take place, we're seeing that occur. So what that means is more and more of them over the course of time, again, not incredibly pronounced, but it all adds up, are going to be receiving homestead credit or more of the homestead credit as well.
Go ahead and continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Specifically on the disabled veteran credit, that's what I was asking about. Is that going to be offset, or is that in addition to? Because the last time the disabled veterans got that, and then the $500 was in addition to that. Is that changing? That was the question.
My apologies. That is factored in. The credits that disabled veterans may be receiving currently. That's factored in, and that the disabled veteran credit occurs at the beginning of the process. That's a deduction in taxable value. The primary residence credit comes after that calculation occurs and is subtracted from the consolidated tax due. But that was taken into a full account.
Thank you. Go ahead and continue, Commissioner.
Right. Well, I think I've given hopefully a good flavor in terms of, or a good, some background information on why the numbers changed. But I look at it as well as they're going to continue to change. If our state continues to grow, if it continues to remain healthy, just a normal rate of inflation is applied to housing values. These totals will grow over time. But when I think of new housing starts, that's an indicator that the state is healthy. We're growing, and it's a good thing. It means more relief to citizens. More relief is making its way to citizens. So that in itself is a very positive aspect of the plan. So I have a number of scenarios that I've handed out. I'm not going to go through all 15, but as an example, if you live in a $200,000 home, you're not receiving the homestead exemption, and I'll direct you to the 8.5 by 14 to the lower right out of those 9 different scenarios that are listed. If you live in a $200,000 home and your taxable value then is $9,000, you're not receiving any of the homestead because you may not qualify for that, but you are receiving the $1,550 primary residence credit. Your remaining tax obligation will be approximately $700. That is based on 250 mills. Now, I, as a North Dakota or a Bismarck taxpayer, my mill rate this past year was 257. Some jurisdictions may be at 240. I believe Grand Forks County is even higher, or the city of Grand Forks, I believe that is pushing closer to 300. So it's going to move around, but these scenarios use 250 mills as an average. If you are a individual who receives the full homestead credit and you live in an approximately $300,000 home, after the homestead credit deduction is applied and the primary residence credit on a $300,000 home, you will pay no property tax. Your property tax will be covered in its entirety. So that will certainly help keep senior citizens in their homes. If they get half of the credit, and under the plan, that would raise the income threshold to $80,000. I'll point out that's more like $90,000 in income, because the average senior citizen in retirement spends approximately $5,000. That is their out-of-pocket medical cost. If you have a household of 2, that is a $10,000 deduction from their income that they can take in order to qualify for the homestead tax credit. So when we're looking at these household levels raising to $50,000, that's really a $60,000 household if there are 2 individuals living there. And that's just the average out of pocket that is currently experienced by senior citizens for medical. It's approximately $5,000 each. So that makes the scenario up in the upper left that I just described very realistic, that we will have a number of people that will receive both. If their income level is higher than that, of course, then they're not going to qualify under the plan, but for the homestead portion, but they will receive the primary residence portion. Now, if you are not receiving the homestead, what does it mean in terms of approximately how much of the value of your home, the true and full value, would be covered under the plan, the $1,550 credit? And that's approximately $140,000 in terms of your market value or the true and full value of that home. So for everyday citizens, the first $140,000 is covered in terms of property tax obligation, taxes owed. And that is approximately 1 in 4 North Dakota households are going to receive that type of relief in its entirety. So we've got senior citizens, and we also have the lower home values. It's somewhat difficult if you live in Bismarck. We have to remind ourselves that you're probably not going to find many homes in Bismarck, if you can at all, for that amount. But when you move to our rural, look at our rural communities, whether it's Steele, whether it's New Salem, whether it's Page, North Dakota, you can certainly get more house for $150,000 and than you can in one of our larger metro areas. But there are other scenarios that break it down in a similar fashion. Right in the middle, if someone receives half of the homestead deduction, they can live in a $270,000 home and not receive, not have any property tax owed, if they're getting half of the homestead and the $1,550. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of how impactful, what type of impact House Bill 1176 has. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tax Commissioner Crocius, can you explain the non-primary resident, and was that included last time? And is that a landlord?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, can you repeat that, please, for me?
Mr. Chairman, it'd be on page 21, all primary residential property and non-primary. So we're also including second homes, or I own 10 homes in Dickinson, and all of those then do not pay property tax if they're at that lower level?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, hopefully this helps to frame it up. 2 years ago, rewind to the last session, there were, based on census, 206,400 homes in North Dakota, residential homes. There were not households, but single-family residence homes. Currently, going into the next biennium, there are approximately 217,500 primary residence homes. When you start to take second homes, they do not qualify. A second home does not qualify, whether it's a vacation home, whether it's a second home used for rental purposes. Those have been taken out of the 217,500 number to net it down to the 165,000. You had asked about farmsteads, Representative Steiner. They're also removed from the equation if they qualify for the farmstead exemption. And the qualification for that is receiving 2/3 of your income from farming. So we have farms out there that they exist. They're farmsteads. They may not qualify for the farmstead because of income, or they may just be they may be a home in the country that's on ag land and listed as such. But for all intensive purposes, roughly about 15,000 received the farmstead exemption. Now, they were also taken out of the 217,500. So second homes are removed, vacation homes, homes used for rental purposes, non-resident owned homes are not in the equation. Farmsteads are not in the equation. And when you take those different tribal housing on tribal land is not in the equation, but they are embedded in the census numbers. Those have been removed. they don't pay property tax. So all of those considerations were taken into account to net out to approximately 165,000 homes. So I hope that answers your earlier question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, for example, you have somebody who bought 18 acres with a 1921 Sears and Roebuck home, moved in from Colorado. He's not a farmer. He just moved here to be close to Lake Sakakawea. He would receive a tax break, correct?
That is correct, as long as it is not a second home. If it's
It's
the,
his
and
primary
it's the
residence.
primary residence.
Right.
That is correct. Where
Okay, and then if someone has, is farming and they get the home, they get an exemption, but they don't get the full exemption on their home. Can you explain how farm homes are taxed? Because they don't get a complete exemption. I thought there was a level where they start paying tax once the farm home is valued certain, if you have $1 million farm home, I'm assuming the assessor is going to be taxing it because there was a cap.
you know what, I do not believe, Representative Steiner, that there is a ceiling on that. And I'm getting confirmation that there is no ceiling.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, in the past, we've had numbers that also showed the savings related to the homestead tax credit and other property tax related bills of keeping our seniors in their home and keeping them off of Medicaid and keeping them out of institutionalized care, whether it be basic or skilled care. Was there any factors inside of the fiscal note or consideration given to the money that will be saved on the Medicaid side of the formula by keeping our senior citizens in their home?
Chairman Hedlund and Representative Porter, that was not, I did not calculate a potential offset, if you will. It's an interesting and I think very valid point, but no, that wasn't a part of the calculation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may continue, Commissioner, is it possible that you take a look at that over the next couple of weeks and discuss with the Department of Human Services and see what kind of number we would be looking at? Because I think that people will find that it's significant. Right now, our Medicaid program, we pay half out of the general fund and half is federal funds, but the cost to be out of their primary residence into a skilled, basic, or assisted living facility is fairly expensive. And I definitely see some savings inside of this, that keeping people in their home is going to save us significant dollars on the other side.
I will certainly follow up Representative Porter and see what we can come up with. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Representative Haggard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, do we have, I know we're talking about 1176, but with the primary residence credit that we offered last time, do we have a demographic breakdown of like 65 and older tied to the homestead tax credit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haggard, yes, I believe I could produce that could be obtained.
I guess, and may I continue? I'm curious as to what level or how many seniors with the homestead tax credit with that availability, and even with the $500 primary residence credit that we're currently under, how many homes in the 65 and older are at zero right now, and what kind of benefit that looks like? As you're researching Representative Porter's question, it'd be great to get that data too.
Yes. No, I appreciate that. I'd be more than happy to look that up. I can tell you approximately one thing. In looking at in developing the fiscal note, and there's an inverse relationship between the $550 credit and the homestead credit amount received. the more a senior citizen receives, and if they receive the full amount on the, for homestead, for example, which is approximately $250,000 in terms of true and full value, or $11,250 in taxable value, a deduction before the mill rate is applied. That does create less of a reliance on the primary residence credit portion of 1,515, which occurs after that part of the process. And that was taken into account in terms of estimating as people traveled, not only up and through the, for seniors in particular, through the income brackets, but also as their housing values, associated housing values changed as well, oftentimes running parallel to one another, not always, but often. That was certainly factored in. Because otherwise you have an overinflated number that would be presented. But and then there's a threshold when they go from 100% of the credit on homestead to 50% of the credit based on surpassing that income tier of 50,000. We'll call it net, but in reality, often 60,000 in household income. So that was all put together, but I can follow up. I'd be more than happy to follow up on that.
Any other questions? Representative Vista.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I may have misunderstood Mr. Morissette or conflated 2 points he was making, but I understood him to suggest there was significant turnback dollars for the homestead credit. Could you either correct that misunderstanding or speak to why that was?
Chairman Hedlund, Representative Vista, currently the homestead credit is on pace for approximately a $20.5 million disbursement per year, which would be $41 million per biennium. The disabled veterans credit equates to another approximately actually, that's with the disabled veterans credit. I'm trying to remember back on the numbers. It's approximately 20.5. So out of the 48 million actually 48 million on homestead, I'm going to back up again. So we'll start over again. So our current ask in the upcoming biennium is 48 million for the homestead and 22 million for the disabled veterans credit. Out of the 48 million, there was a higher number from the last biennium, so there will be more turnback. But the 70 million was the number that was used to calculate the fiscal note, the additional 70 million on top of the 535 million. Out of that 48 million, we're on pace to use 41 million of it this time. And that includes a small amount of renter's refund. So there's only about a $7 million cushion built into our 25-27 budget. And I think it could be better promoted. We don't have resources to promote it extensively, but we did see from the primary residence credit that was very effective. I think there are potentially more seniors that can take advantage of the program. I don't know if it's exponential, but I think they're out there. So that is pretty close. And then we're running even closer when you look at the disabled veterans credit based on the $22 million we're asking for. We would only have approximately, call it a $2 to $3 million turn back in the next biennium. But we can move those funds back and forth. If one is if we need to do a small shift, we can do that. So it's a fund that is an umbrella over both programs. But for all intensive purposes, the turnback amount based on the 70 million we're asking for, that's embedded in the calculations, would be relatively small. We're being more precise, if you will, in terms of what we're asking for.
May I continue?
Go ahead.
And thank you for that explanation, Commissioner. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. And just to make sure folks are understanding, when we are talking the renter's refund in the context of existing tax policy and what's proposed in 1176, that's that limited relief to the same eligible folks for the homestead credit for the homeowners based on age or disability status?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ista, the renter refund program is different criteria. There is, to be honest, it's a somewhat complicated formula. And because it is somewhat complicated, I have three key team members behind me, including Shelley Myers, Charles Dendy, and then also Helen On. And then we have, I know, other staff members, but Shelley's team in particular, they are on the phone walking through people through the renters refund program to get their application, and they call. It is somewhat complicated, to be perfectly honest, and they need our specialists, and Shelley and her team do an incredible job with that. I can always tell when they're on the phone with someone who might be a bit hard of hearing. They're incredibly patient. They're incredibly polite with them. They walk them through, and my office is about 50 feet away, and I can hear them on the phone working with those individuals. So it puts a smile on your face because someone's getting some help.
Commissioner, you've read the bill, I'm assuming, and there's a section 11 in it that creates a new primary residence certification that you're going to be required to develop. Is the purpose behind that to create a path in which it will not take an annual recurring sign up by the property taxpayer? Or I'm looking at the language, and I'm failing to find it at this moment, any language that speaks to that. Could you speak to it, your thoughts?
Chairman Hedlund, I'd be more than happy to. Similar to how we went about administering the primary residence credit, last year we had a 99% approval rating where people gave us a perfect score. The 1% roughly that didn't, it wasn't about the process. It was about philosophical differences with property tax, to be perfectly honest. But that aside, we took a look at that program, how we administered it, and we went back to the drawing board and said, how can we make it even easier this year? So we developed the self-populating feature. If you applied last year, it was just your house number, first four letters of your last name. We wanted people, we had an average time last year of just under 5 minutes. We measured it, believe it was 4.91 minutes per application. We knew the parcel number lookup was causing the most, contributing to that amount of time needed. And so we wanted to get around that. We're going to continue to look at similar mechanisms like that. With the shift, though, in terms of home ownership, the buying and the selling, new housing starts. There are people that purchase a rental home, that home before did not qualify. Now it may, if it turns into a primary residence, or if they turn their primary residence into a rental because they want to live in Arizona or Florida and escape the cold weather we're experiencing now. I think with just so many different types of movement that can occur, I think it would be difficult to just automatically assume that from year to year that is going to remain as their primary residence. For many, yes, without question. But to fully automate and have that type of approach, I'm the first one who would vote for that. If we could crack the code on that, we'll continue to review it. The team took over approximately 25,000 calls last time. It's a very seemingly simple process. It takes resources to effectively administer it. It's a heavy lift, it ripples through the agency. It starts with our property tax team, but it ripples through the agency, and we want to make sure we do a good job with it. So, you know, Chair Headland, Mr. Chairman, I would really like to think that that would be a possibility, but I don't know that we can get to that point. But we'll make the process equally as simple, straightforward, easy to do, minimal amount of time. And we're looking, I'm considering a few different mechanisms that we might be able to apply as well to just try and figure out how do we get people into that application and confirming it's their primary residence with a minimal amount of effort and coinciding it with other processes we may already have in place.
Thank you. Any other questions for Commissioner Crocius? Well, thank you for helping us out, and I'm sure we're going to be talking quite a bit to you about this bill in the upcoming days as we work it in committee. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you again. Further testimony and support.
Chairman Headland, members of the House Finance and Tax Committee, Josh Askvig with AARP North Dakota. And specifically wanted to stand up today and support two sections or two portions of the bill, the homestead property tax credit and the primary residence credit portions of House Bill 1176. Creating a livable community is a priority for AARP of North Dakota. We want communities and towns and cities where all ages can live, work, raise their families, and retire. And AARP knows that essential to this vision is affordable housing. There are some new members on the committee, so if you're unfamiliar with AARP, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. We work on behalf of those 50 and older in North Dakota, and so I'm not here to sell you insurance today. I'm here to talk about public policy that impacts older North Dakotans. So attached to my testimony, I kind of want to just get to that is a number of charts. So every 3 years, AARP North Dakota goes out and surveys North Dakotans 45 and older on the issues of importance to them and their families. And we ask questions about health, we ask questions about retirement, we ask questions about the communities in which they live. And so in 2023, we did that survey and we asked them a number of questions. And I just pulled out a few slides that I thought would be informative to why we're supporting the two sections, or the two, I shouldn't say sections, it's multiple sections, but the two portions of the proposed legislation in front of you. So the first slide, which is actually page 2 of your chart book, is we asked North Dakota residents 45 plus about independent living issues that are important to them. And you've already talked a little bit about this. I know Representative Porter asked a question about folks wanting to stay independent and safe in their communities. Somebody who spent a long time on human services has probably heard that spiel a few times. But it is a very important issue to older North Dakotans. Just behind getting to places independently and having enough services so that people can be cared for in their homes as they age is having high quality long-term care and staying in their homes as they get older. We dug deeper then. We asked a follow-up question. So if you go to the chart on page 3, we asked North Dakota residents age 45 plus to identify factors that would impact their ability to remain in their home as they age. Number 1 was increasing property taxes, quickly followed by heating and cooling costs, increasing maintenance costs, being close to goods and services, safety in your neighborhood, and yes, increasing rent. We have a number of renters that are older adults in North Dakota, and it is a concern to them as well. So the last 2 charts just tell you a little bit more about AARP, and if you want to dig deeper into the research, we can do that. I just pulled out the relevant sections for today's testimony. So we support property tax relief that can be provided in an equitable manner to low and moderate income homeowners and renters. Circuit breaker programs like the homestead program make a difference. We know as 2024 was happening, property tax happened to be an issue that people were talking about. Not sure why. That was a joke. We all know why. And every time we were asked about it, we reminded folks that those 65 and older, North Dakota had a very good circuit breaker program in place. I don't have the numbers. And in fact, one of the questions that was asked is a question I asked the tax commissioner as well. So looking forward to seeing the numbers in terms of the utilization rates. What I would say, Representative Ista, to your earlier question, it was the session before Commissioner Crotius. The tax commissioner at that time was in asking for a deficiency appropriation right after we had raised the thresholds as part of it. And so making sure that that has adequate funding so that we don't have to come back and ask for a deficiency appropriation is an important consideration. So you've heard the rest of it. I do have one minor recommendation on the homestead piece of it. That is every 2 years we come back. It's felt like at least over the last probably 4 sessions, Chairman Hedlund, maybe 5 sessions adjusting the homestead credit.
I think we've adjusted it every session for at least the last, probably 10 out of the last 12 for sure.
You may have made some refinements, but in terms of escalating the income qualifications, I know there was a big change. I think it was 4 or 5 sessions ago, and then we've adjusted it every session since. As part of it, our recommendation is you would index it to inflation, so you don't have to revisit it every 2 years. It would keep pace. And then I should also just point out the renters relief. I've had actually more questions since the session has started about renters relief than I actually have about homestead, primary residence, or other property tax questions. So that expansion that's in the bill from 400 to 600, well, may feel like a nominal amount or marginal amount, is something that I think is very important to those renters. So with that, appreciate the time and look forward to seeing your work on this bill.
Any questions? Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Asfig, you kind of skirted around a little bit of the issue of the caps that
you noticed.
I'm new to this committee, so I'm trying to figure it out. By doing a number, and we can use the 1550, but by doing a number, it becomes irrelevant over a period of time if you don't have caps in place, because as the other people with the sharp pencils explained, that in order to get to a system of 0 on primary residence, you're going to have to rely heavily upon legacy fund earnings. So if we don't slow the growth on that property tax side, since we're paying the vast majority of it back to the local political subdivisions, how do we get to that end game, and what makes the 1550 relevant in 5 years if you're living in 10% property tax increases?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Porter, we don't have a position on the cap at this time. And so that's the policy decision you'll have to make. So we're here to say, we know property tax is on the minds of older adults. It's a concern for them to stay in their homes as they age, and that we know the primary residence and the homestead credit and the renter's refund have been helping in that effort. So if you choose to do the cap, that's certainly your purview. We're not weighing in on that at this time.
Mr. Asvig, curious, your membership made up of a lot of members that do rent. How do you think they feel about the bill itself, which in essence is going to dedicate legacy earnings to property owners and property primary residence owners only? And moving forward, as a renter, there's really not much there for them. How do you think your membership feels about that?
Chairman Hedlund, great question. A majority of our members, between 82 and 83,000 in North Dakota, are homeowners. So but there are a significant portion that are renters. That's why we're supporting the expansion in the renters relief program under the homestead credit as well. Again, we've heard about property tax. We continue to hear about property tax. You saw the number of those that identified it, 50% said that was an issue for them to stay in their homes, and that high price of rent was one as well. And so if you want to do more for renters, we certainly wouldn't oppose that.
Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony. Curious, how many out there want to testify in support of this bill yet? Okay, come on up. Who's ever next?
All right, good morning, Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee, Matt Gardner, Executive Director for the North Dakota League of Cities. I'm sure no surprise that we're up here to talk about this bill today. And I just want to make clear that, we support this bill, and the League of Cities wants to be part of making this workable. And to get started, I just want to share a little bit of information about the cities in North Dakota. There are 355 incorporated cities in our state. And one fact I like to share is 307 of those are under 1,000 population. So when we're talking about tax policy, we got to keep that in mind, that we have a Russo in North Dakota, and we also have a Fargo and everything in between. So sometimes it's difficult to put a blanket policy over our communities who are providing those services. Some other stats I like to share, at the state address, we saw that our population is approaching 800,000, which is exciting to see that growth and those people moving into North Dakota. But of those 800,000, over 600,000 live in our communities. So over 76% of North Dakotans live in cities all across the state. And, I think they like to live there because that's where the services are. And if you don't live in a city, you're traveling to the city to get your services, whether you need to go to the grocery store or to the doctor. Our visitors to the state are visiting cities for our hotels and accommodations. So North Dakota cities play a big role in North Dakota. Another stat I like to share is cities we manage over $4 billion worth of property. So the citizens of North Dakota has entrusted us in over $4 billion worth of property. So we have property we need to maintain, look after, utilize, replace occasionally, and that's no short order. And the last stat I'll share on this side is 10,000 miles, a little over 10,000 miles of city streets in our communities. So we have to crack seal, fill potholes, remove snow. And I don't have the number of miles of water lines, but I imagine under a numerous amount of those streets, we also have water lines as well. So when you think of community, not only are we providing essential services, but we have a large amount of infrastructure that we maintain as well. And so that kind of segues property taxes. I think the sentiment, around Measure 4 when I would have conversations is, the misunderstanding of what property taxes pay for. Yes, it goes into the general fund, and you can utilize the general fund for numerous items. But really, the way it's functional out in our communities is a little different than that. And the way I like to start is what, in general, property tax does not pay for is usually it's utilities. So when you think of water, sewer, garbage, a lot of times your fees that you pay and your utilities are paying for those services. So that leaves the other things for property tax. And in the majority of the time, it's public safety. We have a lot of communities out there where their levy for property tax does not even cover public safety. So public safety, we think of ambulance service, police and fire in general. Sometimes it could be 911 dispatch, those sorts of things. So if we think of the bill as written, there's property tax reform and property tax relief. When you think of the reform piece, when we talk about capping property tax levies, that's where you're going to see the reduction in services for citizens, is those things that property tax pay for, which is generally going to be public safety, as well as street maintenance and snow removal. So just a little plug for the property tax relief. The league has supported the homestead tax credit for a long period of time. It gives relief to those aging individuals, as ARP discussed. That's a good program moving in the right direction. On the primary resident tax credit, we heard good things from our communities on that as well. I think the legislature is definitely moving in the right direction. But we want to make sure when we talk about property tax levies, or our levy authority for that dollar amount, that we have a meaningful discussion. We want to be part of the discussion to make sure that what we press forward is workable. Before I get into this real quick, I have a little stat in front of me that I want to share. So the Tax Foundation recently came out with a study about the tax environment for every state in the nation, and North Dakota ranks 9. We're in the top 10. And so if you look through, our corporate tax rate is 7, ranking is 7. Individual income tax is 17, sales tax at 15, property tax at 4, and unemployment insurance tax is 12. So a large part in due to you and the services and showing budgets at the local level is in part due why we make the top 10 list here in North Dakota, which is something to be proud of. But we do understand that there's some need out there and some merit to doing some property tax relief and reform. So the last night, this is a busy season for all of us. Last night we had a conference call among a number of mayors all across the state and city administrators, city folks. We had a good conversation about this bill that's in front of you today. And we spent a lot of time on the reform piece. And, I'll tell you that the sentiment really was that we want to be a part of the solution and that we're here to have a discussion and try to figure out what's workable. And after a lot of discussions, a fixed rate of 3%, is going to be difficult for us. You don't have to look back very far and see that the CPI inflation index was at 8%. And many of the costs that we outlay, whether that's paving a road or buying a fire truck, a squad car, those types of costs, we really don't control those costs. That's a form of the market. So much like you as legislators, when you appropriate funds, you're kind of at the mercy of the market. We are too. And so to ensure that we provide those services, we feel we could use a little flexibility. And we kept going back to CPI. CPI tracks, what inflation, right now I think it's 2.8%, somewhere in the mid 2% range. So we came to last night is we feel CPI plus 2% would give us a flexibility. If we talk about this year in general, that'd be about 2.8%. And, cities, they don't have to take all of that. They're able to budget, for their needs within that range. And we also had discussion of, can we put in a ceiling and a floor? Again, a few years ago, inflation was at 8%. Nobody on the call thought that they needed that 8%. So maybe you can put a ceiling of 6%, that they can take maximum, and put a floor in there at 2%. And that's probably not going to be needed because I don't know if inflation ever dips, it gets close to 1 sometimes, but CPI plus 2%. And that would give the flexibility for communities to provide the services that they need. And I'll let you know that it wasn't comfortable. I don't think anybody on the call said we're going to be able to keep doing what we're doing, in that range, but we still feel that we can provide those essential services that property tax pays for, which again is public safety and street maintenance, snow removal. So that was one conversation that we had last night. The last one is, what do we do in case of emergency? And I realize that in the bill, you can go to your voters and ask for an increase, and it's good for 1 year. The hard part is if we respond to an emergency, like, it's winter, large snow years. A few years ago, we got dumped on and had a lot of cash outlaid for snow removal. So if you have an event like that, or, fires as we experienced last year, you're going to burn through your emergency funds pretty quick. And if you have to wait till you go back to the voters to replenish those funds, that's going to be difficult for us. So in order for us to meet the needs of our citizens, we feel like we need some tweaks there on how we can respond to emergencies. But then the last thing we discussed is, growing communities, those hundreds of thousands of people that have moved to North Dakota over the last 10, 20 years, they live and work and, reside in our cities. And so there is some growth. Now, the example that was brought up is if you have to add a fire station to a community. You could probably find funds to build the fire station, but it's going to be difficult to find those operational funds when you need to fill that fire station with firefighters. So we'd like to also have an opportunity to go to the voters to find a way for those additional increases in operations. Another example, and the city administrator from Mandan is behind me, but in Mandan, there's a large street project that's a joint project between the city of Mandan and the North Dakota DOT. And DOT is currently maintaining that roadway project. Once they get through the large road construction project over the next, I I mean, it's a multi-year project. The city of Mandan will now be maintaining that road, which is improvement, further crack sealing, filling potholes, snow removal. So that's going to be a significant increase to their base budget needs, and maybe something like that. It's an agreement with the state, where there's a different process, but we still need a process to find a way to cover those long-term costs that we're going to incur, in growing communities. So just a little recap. I mean, I think CPI is a better index, for that inflation. We need to find ways to respond to the needs of our communities, whether that's through emergency or growing community needs. We want to get the voters involved in those processes, if at all possible. But, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just think we're here to work on this bill, make sure it's workable and can provide the relief to the citizens that they need and still allow us to operate and provide those essential services. So I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Representative Haggard.
Thank you, Chairman Hedlund. Mr. Gardner, I guess this question would apply to all political subdivisions, and I won't ask all of them this question, but you're up here first, so you get it.
Yep.
In order for this committee to properly work this bill and understand the needs of your constituencies and those of other political subdivisions, I think a piece of information that would be great is being able to understand, and I know they'll all be different, but how many of your constituents are maxing their mill rates out, and what do you have left for overhead? And are there any trends that you see across the state? Because I know we're all different, as you alluded to in your testimony, but those types of things would be, I think, vitally important as we continue the discussion on this bill. So more of a request than a question.
Yeah, Chairman Hedlund, Representative Hagertz, we probably have about half of that information, so it's readily available. And the trends piece, I think we can just have some conversations to find that out. When you think of a city in general, we have a lot of infrastructure. So when you think of sewer, wastewater, drinking water, streets, roads, the buildings that we have, that's one piece of the pie. And then you have operations, as another piece of the pie. And just one thing I want to mention is staffing. If we think of inflation or a 3% cap, recently at Governor Burgum's budget address, we'll see what the new incoming governors or what the new governor's budget says, but he had a 4% and 3% increase for staff salaries. Well, if we're capped at 3%, we'll never be able to keep up with state salaries likely. So I think staffing costs, will definitely be a trend you see. I think equipment costs, a fire truck is over $900,000 these days. So I think you'll see those hard costs are going to be difficult for communities to keep up with. So we can provide that information.
Representative Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Matt, as far as with the caps, you said there's 307 cities that are 1,000 or less. They would be most affected by the caps because the bigger communities, and I would think with the bigger counties, they have enough different revenue sources that they wouldn't be nearly as affected by the caps. Is that safe to say that the ones that are under 1,000, yeah, they probably don't have the revenue source, but the bigger communities would have the revenue sources under this cap proposal?
Chairman Hedlund, Representative Doctor, I think that's a difficult answer. First off, the city of Animus, for example, 3% cap would be $800 that they would receive. So what can a community with additional $800? That's pretty limited. But, when you think of the services the city of Animus provide is small compared to our large cities. So I think what you're talking about is really a scaling in scale, $800 for Animus, $100,000 for name your other community. It has the same impact, and it all depends on what those needs are. I think you're alluding to a Representative Doctor about every community is different. In my time with the league, which has been about 3 years, I've been to, I think, over 130 cities now in their city halls, touring their water treatment plants. They're all unique. It's hard to put your finger on it, but you're right. A larger city has more revenue sources available to them, but they also have higher expectations and more services to provide. You think of the miles of streets in Bismarck compared to Animus, for example. So I think as a scaling problem, I think the impact you'll see in every community.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Gardner. So as we look at this and we start diving in and getting to things like your counter proposal to the governor, I guess I would like to see some additional information from the political subdivisions. I think it's important that we see what their reserves are in percentage to their overall budget and in dollars. I would also like to see what their overall budget and percentage has gone up each year. And then I think the other really important thing is to know what the percentage of property tax revenue relates to their overall budget. I know that the city of Mandan always during property tax season gives us that information. I don't recall what it is, but I know that it's not a super high percentage of their overall budget is even related to property taxes. I think I honestly could live with your counter proposal if you're making it for your overall budget and not just property taxes. I think that the percentage relative to each is a way different number. When I look at CPI doesn't mean anything to North Dakota. We're a commodity-driven state, and CPI doesn't even work inside of the state. When you talk to businesses and you talk to people that own rental property, it's a non-existing index. So I would be interested to see an index maybe formulated by the Bank of North Dakota that actually has meaning to our economy and not a national economy. But those are some homework things for you and the rest of the political subdivisions that would like to counter the caps so that we get all the information to make the decision and not just little itty bits and pieces.
Okay, Chairman Hedlund, Representative Porter, fair enough. We'll start providing some information. Yes.
Any other questions? Just Mr. Gardner, before you go, in what you laid out that you would like to see in that range of possibly 2 to 6% increases. When I had a discussion with the local mayor of my largest city in my district, he indicated to me that he had looked, and over the last 10 years, they have had average growth of 4.5% within that range you're talking about. So if we were to allow that range and look at it, it really isn't going to answer the question and what the property taxpayers are demanding from us, and that's reform. There's no reform associated with that kind of a range of growth. So you understand the dilemma that we've been presented with here on this committee, and we want to work with you for solutions. I hope we can come up with something, but I'm here to tell everybody in the public, this is not going to be easy to solve, and there's going to be problems associated with whatever we do, that we're not going to be able to come up with the perfect bill here. And I hope everybody understands that. But I think our hands are somewhat tied in what the public is demanding from us. And that, I want those comments to resonate with all of the presenters here who are levying property taxes at this time.
Yes, Chairman Hedlund, thanks for, being blunt and honest. I mean, I think that we want to have those discussions as well. When we were on the call last night, it was very clear that, this is going to be some pain points for everybody. But I think the services that communities provide in all political subdivisions are very critical. I think when we talk to our members, and especially mayors, they're very concerned with the health and safety and welfare of their residents. And that comes in many forms, including the services that we provide. So we're just going to have to strike that balance.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking the bluntness of my question. doing it in a very respectful way. I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be short. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what happened to Sam Darnold?
That's a question that there's no answer to.
Okay, yeah. My name is Aaron Burst. I'm with the Association of Counties. I will be quick because I don't want to be repetitive. I've handed out one sheet of paper. It's not formal remarks. It's not three-hole punch. You can throw it away when you're done. I just think we have to have a little bit of perspective. First off, let me just start. We support the bill. The folks that are on the bill are friends of county government. They have been for a long time. In particular, let me just say on the 1550, I think that's a good program. What we were concerned about going into this session is a new way to deliver property tax relief. And just as you all know, every time we change on how to deliver property tax relief, it takes a lot of effort. The tax commissioner, the auditors put that all together. So just increasing that in the same format is a good thing. Regarding the caps, let me be really quick on this. Our member groups are willing to work to see if there's some sort of budgetary growth that we can do. Now, again, the only thing I'm going to suggest is I handed out the one sheet. Mr. Gardner already stole my thunder, but there is the tax foundation on one side that lists North Dakota property taxes number 4 best in the country. If anybody knows about the tax foundation, they are a fairly conservative outfit. If you go to the back page, that is the red book straight out of the tax department's numbers. And you can see actually North Dakota is not outrageous when it comes to property tax. So I agree, we have to do something. My drinking buddies inform me we have to do something. You have done something, but we got to have a little perspective too. We're delivering a lot of good quality services for low cost. And again, that's largely done by you. I do want to take a little bit of disagreement with some of the statements when we said we've not done anything. You have done something, and you've done a lot of reform, in particular the social services. That was 20 mills that you took off the books, and it is gone. The county can't put another 20 mills on the books. That was true reform. So we have done something. Was it enough? Obviously, the citizens want to push farther, so we will do that. I don't want to get into the technical part. I hope what this committee would entertain doing is bifurcating this issue, sending the tax relief portion of this to the appropriators so they can start running the numbers. And then if you would be willing to spend time with us, we will help you through any of the administrative burdens. It might come as a surprise that there are certain counties that actually have a 0 general fund levy. What's 3% of 0? How would we implement that? And as again, Mr. Gardner said, one size fits all is very difficult. And I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. Whatever we do here, it's not going to be perfect. We understand that. But we have counties that are $2 million budgets and ones that are $200 million. So if you have a 3% on 2 million, that's 60,000. You have a 3% on 200 million, that's 6 million. So again, it's going to be a lot of work. We're willing to work with you. We have subject matter experts. If you want to hear from them, they will be available. And I certainly will be available too, but we are open to budgetary limitations. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Burst. Who's next?
Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 1176. My name is Matt Perdue, and I'm testifying on behalf of North Dakota Farmers Union's members. We support the legislation and really look forward to working with the committee to build on the platform that 1176 creates and provide broad-based relief for North Dakota taxpayers. During our last annual convention, our members passed a special order of business saying that property tax relief and reform was the top priority for our farmer and rancher members. They included support for the primary residence credit as a good short-term mechanism to provide immediate relief. They also supported some efforts to limit the growth of the property tax burden on taxpayers. We do have couple concerns with the bill. I think our biggest one is is that this bill potentially creates some inequities that will grow over time. We've heard that this bill creates a path to zero for many North Dakota homeowners. And in that environment, we'll eventually be looking at someday communities taking a vote to override that cap. And you'll have a lot of taxpayers, a lot of voters in that community who will have a property tax liability of zero. My members, the state's farmers and ranchers, our small business owners, they will not be in that boat. They will continue to carry a property tax burden. They may be a minority of the voters in that political subdivision, and that's deeply concerning to us. And so we recommend that we provide similar relief for owners of other property classes, including agricultural property. We also encourage the committee to consider setting a maximum percentage of the total property tax liability that we would buy down for any individual property owner. The political subdivisions shared their concerns with caps. I said earlier, we generally support the concept, but not without some concern. We're particularly concerned about how those caps will impact political subdivisions with small budgets and particularly our rural communities. And so we recognize there's trade-offs with any policy decision that you all make. And I just want to make the point that we're going to continue to be strong advocates for investments in rural infrastructure and services. We think that's even more important in an environment where we're constraining our political subdivision's ability to meet those needs. So again, thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 1176. We support the legislation and look forward to working with you all to build on this platform and provide broad-based sustainable relief. Thank you very much. I will stand for any questions.
Any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Further support?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Pete Hannibin, North Dakota Farm Bureau. At our annual meeting, our delegates passed a policy saying we recommend legislative and political subdivision provide property tax relief through reform and also reform of the government budget process. This is a vehicle bill to get us going in that direction. It's not the perfect answer, as has been said, but we can't be negative toward the idea of reform because that's been one of our longstanding policies. So we look for property tax relief and reform. We certainly have the concerns that this will be a shift to rural property owners, and that concern has been well talked about already. So I can cut it short and say we want to be part of the process. Stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions? I don't see any.
Thank you.
Anyone else here in support that wants to go on the record, or can we go to opposition? Looks like we can start taking opposition. Any opposition? Go ahead, Mr. Blessum, when you're ready.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Hedlund, members of the Finance and Tax Committee, my name is Mike Blessum for the record. I am a resident of Minot, and I am a sitting alderman on the Minot City Council. Now, to be clear, I am here today on my own volition. I am not representing the city or our council. But I did want to give you some perspectives on the property tax issues that you're going to be facing this session. So a couple things that I'll start off with. In addition to the testimony, which I've handed out and also submitted beforehand, I was elected this past summer. So I'm in my first term, actually went through one budget session so far. During that period, we lowered our property tax levy by 20% in one session, right off the bat. Okay, so there's no substitute at any level of government for electing the right people if you have preferences about what actually happens to the people. So this can be done. We did that in the face of what Measure 4 could have done to us and what we were warned about, right? We could have set our baseline well below what it could have been. And there were subdivisions that did the opposite. In Minot, we did it the right way. And I was proud to be a part of leading that ship. With that in mind, we had some opportunities. We have a very big budget in Minot. We are one of those that's over 230 million in the last, during this session, or during this last budget cycle. So we had some opportunities there to make that work for us. The other side, and there was a question that was asked a little bit earlier, we also had a very large general fund reserve. We had a lot of money sitting, waiting, because as many of you know, we have a lot going on in the Minot area. We're spending a lot of money on flood. Thank you to all of you who have helped us along with that, with the cost share that you've done. But there's a huge local portion of that. 35% of that is being paid by the people of Minot directly through our sales tax and through other mechanisms. Not to mention NAWS. That's another huge project that we've got going on. A little bit ago it was mentioned that there are some subdivisions or some homeowners that are upwards of 200 mils. My property tax statement says 347. I was before you last session a couple times talking about a couple different items. One of them was property tax reform, and I talked about what that meant for my kids. I can handle it. We can deal with it. My wife and I are at the point in our life where that works. My kids in their mid-20s, starting to have babies, doing all the right things, are who are impacted by the property tax that we see each and every day. So one thing I did want to point out that to me is a bit ironic, looking back at last session, I stood before you on a bill that Representative Hoverson brought, asking you to put limits on yourselves for what you spend. There was very little appetite for that. Now it's ironic for both of us because now I'm on the other side of it saying, don't impose those limits on us. We know how to do the right things at the local level. Is that to say every local subdivision does it the way that we did or is taking those steps? Absolutely not. But that's on the voters of this state to elect the right people. We had a meeting prior to session about, I suppose towards the end of December with our local legislators. One of the things that I left them with in that meeting was that there were two things I really hoped to see wouldn't come out of property tax reform. And guess what? The governor chose exactly those two items, which is increasing the buy down regime and putting caps on local subdivisions. Those two things to me are the most destructive path that we've got in front of us. And I know you've got a ton of momentum. I know you've got a lot behind this bill. I mean, we've seen the dignitaries that have been here today to speak on behalf of it. And I understand the pressure that's going to come from that. And Mr. Chairman, your words ring very strongly to me that you guys have a lot on your shoulders based on the fact that the people chose not to go the path of Measure 4. And now it falls to you. And so with all of that in mind, I did want to talk about a couple things that I believe actually could make a difference. Things that are in the law that are your purview and are not about you putting the thumb on the local guys. The first is, I think we need to be considering eliminating the carve-outs that we already have in the code. Now, things like Renaissance zones and TIF districts and all of these different pieces. Now, you can make the case that, hey, locally, we could do that in a heartbeat, right? We could choose to shut down our Renaissance zone and remove the blocks from it. We have that power today. But what everybody tells me from the Department of Commerce and everybody else is that if we do that, we put the citizens of Minot at risk because we are not on the same level playing field as the rest of the state. Now you have the power to level that playing field and to remove those carve-outs and make sure that everybody is paying hopefully their own lower share. That's really what I would be looking for from that portion. Secondly, the other structural thing that I think you have a possibility to look at is moving away from valuation. As an example, I mentioned we were able to move our levy down by 20% in the city of Minot. When I got my bill, it almost went up, and that was with the primary residence credit because my valuation got hit. We've got this big opaque process that goes on right now that makes it very, very easy to hide behind the fact that, well, shoot, we did our job, but man, I'm sorry, your property went up. That's good for you, right? I mean, you got more equity there. That's a good thing. Well, no, for most people that hurts. That hits them pretty hard. Here's the other thing. If we did the right job to remove the assessment regime and get rid of valuation, and believe me, there's a lot to that. There's bonding tied to it. There's a lot. There would be a heavy lift, and I understand that. But if you were able to do it, in the city of Minot alone, the assessor's office is worth $1 million on our budget. We wouldn't need it. If you want to look at really ways to reduce the actual spend, not levy authority, none of those things, the actual money we're spending, that's a concrete way to go about that. If you look at moving away from something based on valuation, whether it's square footage or some other physical property of the property, so that when I look at it and we levy $28 or $24 million, you divide that by your factor based on square footage, you know exactly what you pay. It's not dependent on whether the valuation went up. And then third, I talked about buy downs a moment ago. I think we've proven very clearly that they don't work, right, to this point. Now we're going to try another version that says, well, let's continue those and expand them, but now let's put a cap on, and we're going to stop them from doing it. You know, as has been said by the local subs, all the different ways of looking at it. Minot versus Animus is a big difference. I don't know how they would deal with that. I mean, their budget doesn't matter if it goes up 3, 8, 10%. It might be 4 times for 1 year and then fall back down where it was. You know, that it's a totally different world. I don't understand how we can even rectify that kind of thought process in the first place. With that, though, I think there is an opportunity. You guys would have an opportunity, if you chose to put a lot of money back into people's pockets, and that's looking at the sales tax rate. Right now, we have a ton of money coming into the state. We own an accounting firm. We work with sales tax each and every day for our clients. 5% of the sales tax, and mine it's 7.5% overall, 5% of that is coming to the state coffers. I like having the multi-legged stool. I think we all like that concept, right? We don't want every egg in one basket, and I understand that. But moving that from 5% to say 4% would generate roughly $400 million and put it right back into our communities. Then once that happens, Minot's now sitting at 6.5% instead of 7.5%. Hopefully we leave that with the people. That'll be my vote. That's what I would try to do. But I could understand some local subdivisions saying, hey, we've got a little room. You know, we could make a change. We could offset a little bit of property tax, which we already do. Our sales tax pennies already have property relief built in. We could expand that. And so my point is not that you take my proposals at face value exactly as is, but to let you know that this proposal is not the only one. For one thing, you got more than 50 bills coming, and this is the first one. And there's a lot to be talked about, but there are other options to look at. And while the League of Cities, the Association of Counties may not be willing to go as far as I am representing myself to say the caps are a bad idea, I'll say it. The caps are a bad idea, without question. And the buy-down regime depends on the caps. Otherwise, you blow the money again, just like we have so far on buy-downs. So with that in mind, I wanted to address a couple other things I heard a little bit earlier. First of all, one thing I didn't realize in the bill, because I must have missed it somewhere, removing the August statement is a terrible idea. One of the best feedback mechanisms we have in a local subdivision is when people get that first piece of paper. And they do call us and they let us know, what in the world are you doing? It's time to pull that down. I don't think removing that is going to aid us in making sure that we have fiscally responsible budgets coming. Second of all, Representative Ista's question from earlier, a consequence to going over the cap is a huge problem, without question. The city of Minot in the last budget cycle was over its general fund reserve amount that the state allows in Century Code. There is no penalty. There is no issue whatsoever with doing that. That's the way it is today. If you do this and you do the caps without some kind of consequence, that's a big problem in my book. And it needs to be rectified, and you need to put something in there if you're going to go down that route. So, Mr. Chairman, again, representing myself, sitting alderman, experience on the council, understanding what this is going to mean locally, we all understand that the best path to better public policy is electing the right people. Lowering our property tax depends on local elected officials making a concerted effort to lower the cost of government, make sure we're passing that back to the taxpayer. You have the opportunity to affect the law without putting your thumb on the local guys. And I would suggest that you look at additional options to do that without this one size fits all across every local sub. That's going to be really difficult for us to deal with. In Minot, we'd figure out a way. We would, because we've got enough money to work with in different sources. I don't see how this is workable in many communities smaller than us. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time, and I would stand for any questions.
Mr. Blessum, I am aware of a bill that maybe even be hearing as soon as next week in regards to moving away from valuation over to square footage. And is it your plan to be here for that hearing? So we can ask the questions about how you would view this working going forward.
Absolutely. Yes, I do intend to be here.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Mr. Blesson? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further opposition? Is there anyone else here that intends to testify in opposition? Well, I do know there's some that want to speak to the bill without an opinion one way or the other, so we'll take neutral testimony.
Thank you for your time, Chairman Headland and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dr. Amy Kopas. I serve as the Executive Director for the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders. That serves your school administrators in North Dakota. I'm here to talk about the school side of and the school funding model and how schools operate a bit differently than your other political subdivisions. We were very involved in the Measure 4 battling Measure 4 and through that process. And the reason that we were is we're vastly different in how schools are funded than the other political subdivisions. And that's because schools are not municipalities. In Century Code, in Section 40 of Century Code, schools are excluded from municipalities, making us, in law, we are unable to assess fees or specials. So we operate completely differently. As you well know, we're funded on the basis of a per pupil model. So in the school funding formula, you've done an amazing job of reducing property taxes through the school funding formula. Originally, we were able to assess 185 mills, which was bought down years ago to 110. And then in 2013, bought down to where we are right now at the 60 mill level. So then at the 60 mill level is where we are right now. Now, schools then have the authority to assess another 10 mills for educational purposes. And then school boards have the authority to do 12 miscellaneous mills. And there's some specific purposes for those 12 miscellaneous mills. Because we're on a per pupil model, especially for our rural schools, we have fluctuations in how many students that we have from year to year. Now imagine that you're in a smaller school. Let's say, we just talked about an Animus, or let's say you're in a school the size of Carrington or a Beach or whatever like that, and you have 10 to 15 students that change from year to year. We're starting to talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars that can fluctuate from year to year. So school boards need to be able to be instantly responsive to that. Furthermore, right now from the transportation model, we're only reimbursed at about 35% at transportation. We're only reimbursed at about 35% for special education. We're only reimbursed at about 35% for our English language learners. Therein is in that miscellaneous mills is how we are able to find a way to meet our budgets. So in the school funding formula, we have the 60 mills, we have the 10, and we have the 12. So in reality, the school funding formula, I need you to take a look at that as being completely separate from the other political subs. So in reality, schools are the 60, the 10, and the 12, and we're capped at 0 because how we grow is what you give us on a per pupil payment each time. We discuss that every single session in the funding bill. So schools are 10 and 12 and capped at 0. We don't have any growth other than what you give us every single session. So as you discuss caps, I'm going to plead with you that you discuss the caps and the 3% are all the municipalities. Schools are 10 and 12 capped at 0. We're not a part of that conversation, and we really can't be because we have to be able to manage in our miscellaneous at our 12% because everything changes with us every single year as we ebb and flow and flux with our per pupils because we just manage completely different and our formulas are completely different on purpose because they need to be. We want to be absolutely very efficient and lean and mean. Okay, so we're capped at 0. What you give us is the per pupil. And I want to make sure that you really clearly understand that. And that's really keeping us lean and mean. So I want to see if you have any questions about that particular piece. And I have two more people coming up behind me, actually, in our School Boards Association. We have our specialist in our small school funding and our specialist in our large school funding that's here to answer questions for you too. And then Amy with School Boards Association. But we want to make sure you're very clear on the school funding side. I'd stand for any questions that you might have from me.
Any questions for Dr. Kopus?
And we'll be here for you all the way through this process.
Well, I don't see any right now. So thank you for your
You
testimony.
bet. Thank you so much.
Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Brant Dick. I am the chair of the North Dakota Small Organized Schools. We represent approximately 150 school districts across the state of North Dakota, mainly rural school districts. And I am here just to share kind of, answer questions that you may have. Two issues that the caps do provide some challenges for rural schools. One is for small schools. I've been working with a school district this year that they have seen declining enrollment, and to the point where and they're maxed out. They're maxed out in their miscellaneous meals. They're maxed out in their 10 meals. And on top of that, their taxable valuation actually went down. So they're in a real tough situation. And so the 3% would be really difficult for that district to, how are they going to manage their budget moving forward? So in the small districts that are declining, the 3% is a challenge. I have spoken to this committee in the past legislative sessions about the 3% cap. And those are those districts that are seeing great valuation increases. The Watford cities, the Tiogas. When your increases are more than 3%, what happens, it artificially pushes down that 60 mil levy that school districts have. And so, the legislative bodies have fixed that problem. And so now all districts are at that 60 mils. But if you put in a cap, you're going to have districts that are levying 20 mils where other districts are at 60 mils. And so any cap that you put in creates that inequity across the state. So those are the two issues that, as a small organized school, we have issue with is whether it's a small declining school or a school that sees great growth. Because of the way the formula interacts with the 60 mils, it creates issues. So that's what I just wanted to make sure I mentioned, and would stand for questions.
Well, I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There was, discussion earlier about let's just another way of providing relief is let's take the primary residential mills to zero. How would that have worked in your estimation? Is that something that would have worked better than maybe capping, or would we have had the same issues associated with that? I mean, once you're at zero, then you really have no mill levy authority. And
Representative Hedlund, the members of the committee, we'd have to look exactly how that would affect. Again, I think what's been mentioned in the past is really true. When we have districts of 20 kids compared to districts of 14,000, I mean, there's just a difference of how that's all going to interplay, especially the way they interact. To put the primary residence to zero, obviously in some districts that would be a huge difference in their taxable valuation. For other districts, rural districts, it might not be that much different than what we have right now. So again, it would depend upon the reality of how that would interplay.
Just one other question, and something in regards to what Dr. Kopus talked about, and I think you mentioned it too. We want everybody on the formula, but at the same time, I think how is the relief get to the property taxpayer if we allow the public education to continue increasing way above what property taxpayers deem as a reasonable increase? 12%, I think, is what they can do today.
Yes, and to that point, and Chairman Hedlund and members of the committee, to that point, it was mentioned you have provided over 1.8 billion. A lot of that 1.8 billion has come through the foundation aid formula, like Dr. Kopus had mentioned, the 185, the 110 down to 60. So a lot of that has been through the school funding. And you're right, legislator or community members don't understand that they actually have seen some of that relief. How do we move forward with that without, caps or whatever else? We would say as North Dakota Small Organized Schools, that's why local officials, and it was mentioned by Mr. Blessum, that's why you vote in people to make those decisions. I mean, that's their responsibility to respond and make sure that schools aren't increasing their budgets above what they should for the education of their students.
Well, could a school district survive if they were all having to live under the same per pupil amount and that amount only? Or where's this other flexibility that the property tax brings to public education fit into this? Because that is the area that the property tax payer is concerned about. And I think the increases in some of the, if you look at the history of what the state has provided in relief, I think most of it has gotten eaten up with the public school system.
Chairman Hedlund and members of the committee, to that point, which I know wasn't part of your question, but it really is part of the big picture. The 10 mills and the 12 mills in some districts is a whole lot different than 10 mills and 12 mills in another district that may have the exact same number of students. And so there's some inequities there as well. So it's a tough issue. It's a tough problem. We've been able to work with this as schools. Like I said, we've been the property tax vehicle for over $1 billion or since 2013, and even before that, 2007, I think is when it started. And so we understand that we've been able to work with what we have now. To limit it to 3% are going to create issues. It just will. I don't see how that won't. And so again, we're not against property tax relief at all. I mean, that's why we're trying to have neutral here, because we're not against that. We've been the vehicle for many, many years. It's just that one piece is a challenge with the way it interplays, that we want to make sure that, and we're here to help with whatever you need us to do. We'll help you.
Well, we're going to have to figure this out because the bill requires you and gives you a 3% cap. So any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee, Amy DeCook, I'm the Executive Director for the North Dakota School Boards Association. I handed out a written testimony. I will not read it for the interest of time, and I really appreciate you being willing to allow us to be neutral on this bill. And I just want to echo my colleagues from the other local political subdivisions. We too recognize the need for relief, and we support the relief provisions. They're aggressive, and we know that North Dakota residents are asking for that. We also recognize that relief can't come without reform, and we understand that that might come with some tough decisions and some adjustments that our members have to make on the budgeting side. But I also echo what my colleague from NDCEL said about school districts really are different. And I think one of the major concerns we have with the bill as it stands now is lumping all taxing districts into one in terms of the caps. You know, and she mentioned and talked about the funding formula. I don't want to spend time reiterating that, but I do want to just remind the committee that public school districts are in a unique position compared to our local subdivision colleagues. We have a constitutional mandate that sets us apart from them. Our schools are legally required to provide educational services to every student who enters our buildings, regardless of their needs or abilities, regardless of the costs that are associated with providing those educational services, and regardless of the district's current financial situation or resource constraints. Also, I wanted to just mention something that my colleagues didn't talk about, and that was the excess levy voter approval provision of the bill in Section 18, Subpart 3. As it currently stands, we would have to seek voter approval every single year for excess levies. I would ask the committee to consider extending that to at least a 5-year period for planning purposes, and to allow for school districts to properly plan for those fluctuations that we see often. Let's see. I'd also echo what my colleague from League of Cities talked about, building in some safeguards for emergency or unforeseen circumstances. Those connected with major facility repairs or equipment replacements, rapid or unanticipated increases in student enrollment, those types of situations, to build some safeguards into the bill. We would support that, but we appreciate being part of the conversation. We acknowledge that reform needs to be part of the conversation, and we're happy to be a seat at the table and gathering the information that Representative Haggart and Representative Porter asked for. We'll provide that information to the committee as well. With that, I will stand for any questions, and thank you for your time.
There's a question that came up when the petitioners for the measure were out and part of the discussion over the whole measure. And there was a lot of opinion out there that North Dakota's Constitution says the state provides a free public education. Do you believe that the Constitution says that the state is required to fund the 100% of that free public education?
Chairman Hedlund, there's been litigation on this very issue, and the courts have determined that the state is not 100% responsible for the funding of public education. And I think that's a very important part. We have the constitutional mandate to provide for the educational services, but I think the state isn't necessarily constitutionally required to fund the public education system. And so that's really where the rub is. And property tax plays a very important part in funding K-12 education. On average, it funds about 25% of K-12 education, even with the significant property tax relief that this body has provided over the years.
Any questions? Well, I just want to thank you for your testimony, and we have a huge challenge before us, and it's going to take all of us to figure out how to put something out that is going to work, and you're going to have to be part of that. So thank you again for your participation in this hearing.
And Chairman Hedlund, I do want to just reiterate that we are preparing our members and their expectations about what this might mean going forward. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairman Hedlund, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Paul Stremick. I represent the North Dakota School Study Council. So that's the large school districts throughout the state. And a lot of things have been talked about. We know tax relief is wanted and we know it will happen, but just want to bring to your attention, like the cities, any new growth should be excluded from the caps. We just feel very strongly about if there's a new neighborhood that comes in, school districts may need new buses, new drivers. And with the 3% cap, if the new growth is not counted in there, it's very difficult for school districts to address that, just like cities are with snow removal, street maintenance that was mentioned earlier. So I don't want to repeat that.
I believe the new growth is in addition to the 3%. So it's in there.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Anyone else? Committee members, there is online testimony. There's testimony that's been written and that's been entered into the record that I think you should all take a look at. There's more opposition that's been put forward there. There's also in favor and neutral testimony. But if there's no one else here to testify on behalf of this bill, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 1176. Committee members, let's take a 5-minute break.